Hi, I'm Stavish, and this is how I made my track recipe.
I always keep the recipe. Always keep the.
Alright, I thought I would start out by playing the track from the top, and then we'll dive through the details.
Through the city, windows tinted, 5 deep when we in it, in rotation while we twisting. Got a couple bad honeys, Jackie Chan trying to kick it out the box, finger licking, and she looking for the sticky. Yeah, I do just what I gotta, homie, always chase the dollar, never speaking for your honor. In that jam, me no habla, I just do it for the city. Anybody fucking with me, taking family over biddies, but we always keep it jiggy. Ain't nobody testing me, no. Curry with the shot, yeah, I'm praying that they rest in peace. Yeah, I do this to the death of me. Stephanie, Hennessy, yeah, I always keep the recipe. Always keep the recipe. I be Stevie to a hater, like deuces, I see you later. Got a gun, get this weight up, I'm taking.
Alright, let's break it down. The first sound you hear is sort of this like screaming brass horn sound, and this I believe initially came from a Fabian Mazur pack. It was just a one shot, and it was a bit more of like an atmosphere sound. I think I pitched it down 7 semitones. Let's hear what that sounds like. Yeah, so that was around what the original sounded like. And I pitched it down, putting it sort of an F, and did a second layer below that and reverse that layer. So then together it sort of comes in the normal way, and then that's panned to your left, and then the reverse layer is panned to your right, and when they play together it sort of sounds like the horn is sort of doing this like 360 around you in a way. So then that and the sub bass and drums really hold down sort of like the intro mixing section. The sub is just playing the root of the chords that sort of remain throughout the whole track, and they're playing the 1-6-5 harmonic minor progression. So this is the main layer, and I'm just doing a little frequency shifter automation to sort of like pitch bend it into the next chord. Thought that sounded cool. So on its own, this is the layer. And drums. Something I like to do with my snares is you sort of have like a main snare that's very consistent throughout, let's say, a section, in this case, the verse, but then subtly layering different like textures, or in this case, cashmere enhancers, on various hits, and then that little difference can really just keep the energy moving forward and making sure that the snares are staying interesting, because it's not the exact same hit every time. And then something I like to do with my hi-hats is, this is a drum rack, and in each cell of the drum rack, rather than just having sort of like one-shot samples like in this case, I like to do arpeggiators and then the sample, and each arpeggiator is sort of set at a different rate. So what this allows me to do is really quickly get ideas out, because rather than punching in, let's say, 8th note patterns, 16th note patterns, whatever it may be, you can just continuously have sort of one clip, and then it'll play that rate. So this on its own, if you wanted to change up, let's say, what your rate is, then it's as easy as highlighting the 16 notes and saying, let's try triplets for that. So this allows you to really quickly get ideas out, and if you want to change the hi-hat sound, it's as simple as just replacing whichever sample you have in each rack. So, just be 8 swaps here, and then you've got a whole new sort of hi-hat sound with quickly changing pattern. In the second half of the verse here, you start to hear sort of this super saw stack that is mostly heard in the drop, but this sort of starts to tease it, and it's the same progression, that same 165 that we heard the sub bass doing earlier. Right, and now this is obviously frozen and flattened, but to break down the stack really quick, so this is just sort of like your basic kind of square triangle type wave. I think these next two are the main super saw stack. Higher pitch. Yeah, and then just like a little shine on top. So then all together. And then giving it that movement is just the sidechain from the kick and snare. So when that comes in, you can see the gain reduction on the sidechain there. And then at this time, you also start to hear the drop lead. I like to just tease this kind of starting in the second half of the verse, but then really heard once it opens up to the pre.
Ain't nobody testing me. No. Curry with the shot, yeah, I'm praying that they're recipes. Yeah, I do this to the death of me. Stephanie Hennessy, yeah, I always keep the recipe.
All right, so on its own. All right, from a patch perspective, this is pretty straightforward. Something I like to use is the basic WRD table sets. So Serum by default will start you in the basic shapes, and these are a great foundation to start sculpting your sound from. However, you sort of have just these sort of end state perfect shapes. So you've got your sine, you've got your saw, you've got your triangle, you've got your square, and so on. Whereas some of these other basic table sets, in this case the WRD, are going to give you really cool transitions between them. So say you want something with a little bit more set of harmonics. In this case, it looks like I went for kind of a combination between saw and square. You can dial that in with your wavetable position, and then you can even automate this if you want to sort of flex between the different sets. Let's see here what else I did. Okay, and then this, although it's the same position, it looks like I'm doing some frequency modulation from B into this. So this LFO is over a 2-bar section, slightly modulating the amount that it's frequency modulating, and that's really just to create a little bit of movement to keep it interesting, as well as adjusting the cutoff on the reverb filter. So if no FM on this. Yeah, so just a bit more metallic with the FM up. And then as far as effects, just a little delay and some reverb. I don't always do this. I like to have a lot of control over my reverb, so I'll usually do that outside of the patch, but it looks like in this case I added just subtle amounts of delay and reverb. And then it looks like I dialed in the ability to go up 7 semitones, so that'd be up to the 5th, and then down 2 semitones, so down to the 7th. And that's sort of what I use for the pitch bends. Yeah, so here, really diving down with that. Yeah, so this max amount is going to dive down the total amount of what you've dialed in as your parameters for pitch bend range up and down. And that just makes the synth a lot more interesting. So throughout the build up, sort of this filter is just opening up.
Yeah, I do this to the death of me. Stephanie Hennessy, yeah, I always keep the recipe. Always keep the recipe.
All right, and then during the drop, the progression stays the same, which you really hear through the saws. And then what I like to do with saws to have a lot of control, because sometimes when I would have the MIDI playing and then I wanted it to go away, I would just stop the notes. However, I found doing hard utility cuts sort of gave me more control over that. So without the utility, the saws sort of just continuously go. And then once I figured out the phrasing I wanted with this, that's controlled with the utility, and the lead sort of fills in where the saws are not playing. So then together. Yeah, and you see I at one point had more notes sort of in the lead pattern, but to the listener, when you sort of had the lead and the super saws playing at the same time, you really weren't hearing both. So just clearing room for one, I'd cut out the other. So then altogether, the drop section sounded like this.
Always keep the recipe.
All right, and then you might hear how sort of on the turnarounds, when the synths are cut out, they do swoop back in. And that sort of just makes the downbeat there on bar 41 sound a little bit more impactful. So what I'm doing there is just automating this reverb. Even though the main sound cuts off, then this is amplifying up sort of like the tailing reverb of that. And you can just do that really simple with like a dry wet rack. In this case, you've got your dry channel, wet channel, and I'm just automating up the volume of that full wet reverb. And this is done a number of times, as you can sort of see on turnarounds, and then leaving sections, so leaving the drop to the verse, more drop two turnarounds, and then going into the outro as well. All right, let's talk vocals for a second. The biggest thing with vocals is performance. You can creatively process, you can tune, you can layer, you can do all sorts of things with vocals, but the better the performance, the easier the producer's job is going to be to finish the track. And Seth crushed this performance. I really didn't have to do any tuning, any timing adjustments. Where I spent most of my efforts were really fitting into the mix as sort of the energy changes. And you can see that reflected here with just like a utility automation. And what I'm doing is sort of the verses, I got the levels the way I wanted to. Energy was there. And then during the pre, as the energy of the track built up, I needed to make sure to bring his vocal there as well, because it's really like the focal point of the track. And getting the volume right to sort of help that vocal fit in the pocket was key. And you can see there are certain points where you have to be a little bit more meticulous. And this is something I haven't always done, especially like here on this turnaround. I'm boosting the vocal by almost 9 dB, and that's exiting the first drop. So do you hear it?
I be Stevie to a hater like deuces, I see you later. Got it.
Vocal sounds like it's at the same volume, but because this phrase,
I be Stevie to a hater like deuces, I see you.
On its own, you can sort of tell, it's like, that's too loud. But in the mix, the drop is a lot louder than the next verse, especially because I've sort of cut out the sub and the low end for that first part and the drums. This part of the track is a lot quieter. So just little things like this, you might have a great performance and on its own, it's the way you want. But once you have to start fitting into the mix, you're going to have to start doing automations for things like volume, and then the second build-up. I start doing sort of like this vocal chop performance. So let's hear that in the mix.
Recipe. No, I keep the recipe. No, I keep the recipe.
So during this build, started chopping up on the key phrase, the title track, recipe, creating sort of differences in the vocals, sort of building up energy with the track, and you can start to do some auto panning. You can start to add more reverb throughout the build. You could do a pitch up or pitch down if you wanted to. Really any sort of those changes in a repetitive way to help build that tension going into the drop. So I thought I would wrap up with just walking through a few moments that I spent time producing out really after the whole song was there. And these are just sort of those like ear candy moments, keep it really interesting throughout the full listen. So immediately exiting the first drop rather than kicking into the downbeat right away with the verse, sort of eliminating all of the drums and percussion elements, and I believe I even muted the sub. Yeah. So you sort of have just this big difference where you're leaving all this energy from the drop, and then it feels like the floor was kind of cut out underneath you as we ease our way into the next verse. So hearing what that sounds like.
I be Stevie to a hater like deuces, I see you later. Gotta go and get this weight up, I'm taking the elevator. Yeah, she say she need the cooker, I bring them flavors. And the way she call me daddy got me feeling like I'm Vader. Fuck it, back up on my bullshit, I'm a bad motherfucker.
Then we start building up again, and this is same chords that you have in the first verse. However, now I'm starting to bring in, more percussion elements. You've got a piano, and the piano's playing those same chords, but it's a difference to the listener's ears. So you've got that 1-6-5, and just something a little bit more organic that I thought added a nice touch for the second section.
Daddy got me feeling like I'm Vader. Fuck it, back up on my bullshit.
Okay, so the next piece kind of comes in going into the second pre, and this pre is different than the first one. It's not just a copy paste. The vocals are the same for the first half, but then starts that whole sort of like vocal chop, really building up the tension. So I really wanted to find a way to propel the track into this pre, and similar to how we got into the second verse, I cut a lot of elements out, drums, sub, some of the synths, and you can hear what that happens or sounds like here.
Sound like it be nothing, leave you blushing and we ducking. Wait, what is you doing? Don't you know we out in public? And ain't nobody testing me. No. Curry with the shot, yeah, I'm praying that they rest in peace. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not just cutting those things out, but it's also going into your effects. And, you know, if you've got pads, if you've got drones, if you've got buildups, just doing hard cuts right where, and that's frozen, but there's actually no audio happening there. It's a hard cut with just that half bar left, and then there's sort of that sudden change, and it's just Seth's vocal, and it puts it in the spotlight, grabbing that attention back to the listener, saying, all right, here we go, new pre, things are different, you haven't heard this before.
No way out in public. And ain't nobody testing me. No. Curry with the shot, yeah, I'm praying that they rest in peace. Yeah, I do this to the death of me. Yeah. Stephanie in the sea, yeah, you know I keep the recipe. Recipe, 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 recipe. No, I keep the recipe. No, I keep the recipe.
Yeah, so just finding more of those moments. You build the sections out in entirety, but then you cut away, you remove things, you reverse things, you change things up just to keep it really interesting. So, you know, you hear that here, it's just the super saw, then the lead. And we had some fun with additional vocals in this section as well. It's sort of like the pinnacle of energy of the track, so we threw in more ad-libs. You hear some things from Seth. Yeah, and it's not just it's but it pitches and dives back down into the next downbeat. And I'm just using a frequency shifter there, just like I was on the sub bass. It's all frozen and flattened into the track now, but you know, you can fill in the spaces and then find creative ways to accentuate them, pitch bend them down, pitch bend them up, chop them up, anything that sort of creates that ear candy. There's some hard panning on these A samples. And then this drop is twice as long as the first one. So to really kind of just keep building the energy, you're going to hear continuously more percussion elements. And then I bring back in the sort of that initial screaming brass sound that we've only heard in the verses thus far. So that can be found in the drop synths group. Yeah, Horn Forever. And that just sits sort of nicely over this whole second last section.
Always keep the recipe.
So that's the only time the brass really happens in the drop, but it sort of ties the whole song together in a nice way and fills up sort of those upper airy frequencies. One other thing on the higher pitches that I didn't mention with the lead is what I like to do with my drop leads is doing a second layer once I've sort of figured out the phrasing and the sound I'm going to use. So that's something you don't really hear in the song, but you'd miss it if it was gone. This is the main lead that you kind of continuously hear. And it's in your face, it's a little dry. Rather than just adding reverb onto that, which there is, sort of doing the second layer, making an octave higher, soaking it in reverb really helps sort of fill up those upper back frequencies. So then together. And it's different every song, but usually I'll have my lead and then a second layer with a lot more reverb, a bit quieter in volume, sitting either an octave or two above that. All right, I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions or if there are things you'd like to see in videos going forward, just leave a comment below. Thanks.